So while discussing about the Indian national movement till now, we mentioned the Surat split once when we were discussing about the moderates and extremists. Until the beginning of the Swadeshi movement and during the initial phases, the moderates were involved with propaganda. Their successes and praises have been sung in the previous videos. However, their failures too were numerous. The moderates' politics was based on the belief that they would be able to persuade the rulers to introduce economic and political reforms, but their practical achievements were next to nothing. The British never respected them for their moderation but sneered with contempt at their politics and met popular agitations with outright repression. Their failure lay in not keeping pace with the times and being stuck in the mental state of the 1860s, even when it was actually the 1900s. Their ideological stands and claims seemed to be at contrast with what they wanted to achieve, and the British made this abundantly clear to the moderates. Quoting Curzon on Gokhale in 1905, Gokhale either does not see where he is going, or if he does see it, then he is dishonest in his pretensions. You cannot awaken and appeal to the spirit of nationality in India and at the same time profess loyal acceptance to the British rule. We've already discussed in the previous videos that that is exactly what the moderates were doing, because they were scared that the British might come down upon them with an iron hand and crush the little revolutionary zeal, the little nationalist movement that they had managed to gather. They had their own difficulties. We have discussed it in the previous videos, but this is what Curzon also says. Now we look at what the Secretary of State Hamilton said to Dadabhai. The Secretary of State Hamilton once complained to Dadabhai saying that you announce yourself to be a sincere supporter of British rule in India, yet you vehemently denounce the conditions and consequences which are inseparable from the maintenance of that rule. It wasn't mere confusion that led to this situation. It was the inaction of the moderates to take bolder steps irrespective of the prevailing political conditions. They should have come out of their shells and worked for the people, at least in the beginning of the 20th century. This is what the extremists say. This is a critique of the moderates by the extremists. Even as the Swadeshi movement was gaining traction, Minto, the then viceroy, offered a bait of fresh reforms in the legislative councils in 1906, and this worked like a charm. The moderate leadership was keen on discussing it with the British government, and they did so. It was a foolish move by the moderates to discuss reforms at this crucial juncture in the middle of the Swadeshi movement and to cooperate with the British government even while a vigorous popular movement was in full swing, which the government was actually trying to suppress. The result was a total split in the nationalist ranks. This tactic of dividing the Congress internally was tried again in 1924 through the Swarajists and in 36 and 37 via Nehru and the leftists. But Congress had learnt its lesson by then and refused to rise to the bait despite deep differences. However, the Surat split did happen between the moderates and extremists, and this was one of the reasons for the end of the Swadeshi movement. Now we will discuss the actual split of the Congress. The differences between the moderates and extremists in the strategy of the Swadeshi movement have previously been spoken about. Taking it ahead, matters nearly came to a head at the Calcutta Congress of 1906 over the question of its presidency. A split was avoided by choosing Dadabhai, who was admired by all nationalists because he was a very senior figure. The extremists by 1905 were convinced that it was time for the big push. Led by Aurobindo Ghosh, they wanted to push the moderates out of Congress. The moderates were no less determined to split, led by the aging Firoz Shah Mehta, who was once admired for his boldness in the councils. Both sides underestimated each other's contribution to the cause. The moderates did not see that the colonial state was negotiating with them not because of their inherent political strength, but out of fear of the extremists. The extremists failed to see that the moderates were their first line of defense, in that the government would not suppress the movement with such ruthlessness as they might have resorted to had the moderates not been involved. Progress was being achieved due to the extremists, but the people were not being put in jail because of the moderates. The two sides failed to see this. It wasn't that the extremists and moderate leaders were stupid. Tilak and Gokhale clearly saw where this was heading. Tilak did not want the United National Front to break. He understood that a powerful movement could not be built at that point in time, nor could political demands be pressed without a united front. But Tilak, having roused his followers in Maharashtra and then in Bengal, could not afford to dismount the tiger he found himself rising. When it came to the crunch, Tilak had to go with the more extreme leaders like Aurobindo Ghosh than with moderates like Gokhale. Gokhale was simply as helpless in the presence of Firozshah Mehta. He had already said that a split would be an absolute disaster and the bureaucracy will put away both the factions with absolute ease. Gokhale could never persuade or stand up against Firozshah Mehta and succumbed to his own extremists, that is, the extremists within the moderate camps. At the Congress session in Surat in 1907, the extremists opposed the election of Rash Behari Bose just to defy the moderates. This was a mistake, and a split now seemed evident. Tilak later sent a letter of regret to Rash Behari and offered to work in unity with the moderate faction of the Congress. But Firozshah Mehta and his colleagues would not relent. They thought they were on sure footing. Little did they understand the delicateness of the situation. The government immediately launched a massive crackdown on the extremists after the 1907 split. Extremist newspapers were suppressed. Tilak was sent to the Mandalay prison for 6 years. He would be back only in 1914 and he would pick up the threads of the movement from where it was left. These were years that were lost, and this caused the nationalist movement to literally stall when Tilak wasn't there. Aurobindo retired from politics and took up spirituality and escaped to Pondicherry, where he was to build Auroville. Remember that Tilak and Aurobindo were the very spirit of the national movement at that point in time, and both of them were put away, one to a jail and the other to a recluse. Lajpat Rai retired and first went to Britain and then to USA for an extended stay. The extremist leaders were all put away. Without the leaders, the extremists were not able to organize an effective alternate party or sustain the movement. The moderates continued to hallucinate with their hopes resting on government concessions. Gokhale, however, plodded on with the aid of a small band of co-workers from the servants of India society. By 1909, the Swadeshi movement, in the absence of extremist leaders and the inaction of the moderate leaders, had died. Quoting Aurobindo in 1909, "When I went to jail, the whole country was alive with the cries of Bande Matram, alive with the hope of a nation, the hope of millions of men who had newly arisen out of degradation. When I came out of jail, I listened for that cry, but there was instead a silence. A hush had fallen on the country." The Morely-Minto constitutional reforms of 1909 was once again, not surprisingly, very disappointing. It increased the number of elected members in the Imperial Legislative Council and the Provincial Legislative Councils fourfold. Most of the elected members were still elected indirectly. The reformed councils still held no power and they remained merely advisory in nature. They neither introduced an element of democracy nor one of self-government. The underlying undemocratic, foreign and exploitative character of the British rule remained unchanged. The Morley-Minto reforms did nothing that would help Indians gain power. In fact, it was just another hogwash, as the 6192 acts were. Morley, in fact, openly declared in the parliament, if it could be said that this chapter of reforms led directly or necessarily up to the establishment of a parliamentary system in India, I, for one, would have nothing at all to do with it. Minto is literally saying that the 1909 constitutional reforms is doing nothing to give power to Indians. The real purpose of the Morley-Minto reforms, and even the mere offer of it, was to divide the nationalist ranks and to check the growing unity among Indians by encouraging the growth of Muslim communalism. Separate electorates were introduced for the Muslims in the Morley-Minto reforms. Muslims could only vote for Muslim candidates in constituencies specifically reserved for them. This was only the beginning of the chapter on communal electorates, which continues to have implications even today. The institution of separate electorates was one of the most poisonous trees, which was to yield a better harvest in the later years for the British rule. However, for the Indian nationalist movement, this poisonous tree would continue to have implications for many decades, resulting in the partition of India. This concludes the video. Thank you.